Lamar Whitmore froze with his eye pressed against the telescope's eyepiece. The cold October wind blew through his thin jacket, but the young man hardly noticed the discomfort. His attention was fixed on the vault of the sky, studded with myriads of twinkling stars. "There you are," he whispered, carefully tweaking the focusing ring of the old telescope. Saturn came into view, majestic and mysterious, with perfectly outlined rings. 15-year-old Lamar knew the constellations better than the streets of his native Pine Bluff. For him, the sky was more than just a cluster of distant stars. It was a vast map of possibilities, a space without prejudice or boundaries. A vacant lot 3 blocks from his house was his personal observatory. Away from the streetlights, here he could observe celestial bodies without unnecessary light glare. His mother objected to night outings, but today she had a night shift at the hospital, and Kay's younger sister had long ago slept in the care of Mrs. Johnson, a neighbor. The Celestron Next-Star telescope was his pride. 2 years of part-time jobs after school, washing cars and mowing lawns, all for this moment when he could observe the universe through his own instrument rather than the tattered binoculars of high school. After making a note in his tattered notebook of Saturn's position, Lamar glanced at his watch. It was almost midnight. Time to head back. He reluctantly began folding the telescope, carefully tucking the lenses into a special case. At that moment, a police siren sounded in the distance. Lamar instinctively tensed. It wasn't a good idea for a black teenager to be outside after 11 p.m. in Arkansas, even if you were studying astronomy and preparing for college. He sped up his movements, trying to get his equipment together faster, but suddenly, the bright headlights blinded him, and a police car stopped right in front of the vacant lot. "Hey you, don't move!" A harsh voice cut through the night silence. Lamar froze, holding the telescope case in his hands. A tall policeman with a square chin and short-cropped graying hair climbed out of the car. Officer Randall Baird was instantly recognizable by his distinctive gait and massive shoulders. 20 years on the small-town police force had made him a local celebrity. "What are you doing here, boy?" Baird asked, aiming the flashlight beam directly at Lamar's face. "Yeah, I was watching the stars, sir." Lamar raised his hand, trying to shield his eyes from the bright light. "That's my telescope. I'm studying astronomy." Baird grinned as if he'd heard a good joke. "Astronomy, then? At midnight? 3 blocks from a robbed store?" Lamar felt a chill run down his back. "What store? I don't know what you mean." "Greenwood's Mini Mart. Robbed 15 minutes ago. The clerk described the robber as a black teenager in dark clothing. What do I see? You in dark clothes, running with something in your hands." "It's a telescope, sir. I've been here for 2 hours. Look at it." Lamar tried to show his observation notebook, but Baird waved it away. "Hands behind your back, boy. Slowly." The officer put his hand on his holster. "But I didn't do anything. I can prove I was here." Baird shook his head, and there was something cold, unpleasant in his eyes. "That's what you all say. Hands behind your back. Now." An inner voice told Lamar it was useless to argue. He carefully set the telescope on the ground and put his hands behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs encircled his wrists. "Officer, please, I was really just observing the stars. You can check my notes. They are dated. I physically could not have been in the store at that time." "Too smart for your own good," Baird muttered, tightening the handcuffs tighter than necessary. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The standard arrest procedure sounded surreal to Lamar. He couldn't believe this was happening to him. How could watching Saturn turn into a nightmare so quickly? Randall Baird was sure he'd caught a burglar. 20 years on the force had taught him one simple truth. Guilty is whoever looks guilty. And a black teenager running at night with something in his hands near the scene of the crime definitely looked guilty. On the way to the station, Baird mentally built up a picture of what had happened. The kid robbed a store, ran out to this vacant lot to wait it out, and when he heard the sirens, he decided to pretend to be a celebrity lover. Smart, but not smart enough. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Lamar. The guy was sitting still, with a straight back, his expression more puzzled than frightened. It annoyed Baird. Usually they're scared. They know they're caught. "What's your name, astronomer?" he asked with undisguised irony. Lamar Whitmore, sir. Whitmore? You're the son of Chanel Whitmore at Central Hospital? Yes, sir. Baird hummed. He knew Chanel, the strict nurse who'd once told him off for smoking in an inappropriate place. A bloody, unpleasant woman. Well, your mom will be disappointed. Robbing stores isn't the best way to build a career. I wasn't robbing any store, sir. I was really studying the stars. My telescope. That's enough. Baird cut him off sharply. You can tell your tale to the detective. The truth was that Baird didn't care what the detective had to say. He'd already decided the guy was guilty. Too many stories like that in his career. Ghetto teenagers thinking they can do whatever they want, then being surprised when they end up behind bars. Pine Bluff was changing before his eyes. The once quiet southern town was turning into a hotbed of crime. And it's all because of them, Baird often thought, referring to the growing black population. They were moving here from larger cities, bringing their own problems and habits. One less on the streets, he thought as he pulled up to the police station. The system will break him like the rest of us. At the station, Baird quickly filed the arrest. He slightly embellished the details in the report. He wrote that he spotted the suspect running directly away from the store, that when the police car approached, he tried to flee, that a flashlight and gloves were found in his backpack, tools of the robber. He described the telescope as an unusual object, possibly used for burglary. Baird knew it was a lie, but he also knew his word would be believed more than that of some teenager from the south side of town. Keep him in his cell until morning, he told the duty sergeant, Sergeant Miller. Have Detective Parker deal with him tomorrow. Shouldn't we contact his parents? He's a minor, Miller asked. His mother's on the night shift at the hospital. We'll let you know in the morning. Baird brushed them off. Let a night in the cell teach him a lesson. Miller looked uncertain, but didn't argue with Baird. In this precinct, Randall Baird's word was law. Lamar was taken to a holding cell. Baird watched as the door closed behind him and felt satisfaction at a job he considered well done. Another lesson for these guys. The law is the law, he thought as he headed for the exit. If they can't follow the rules, they have no business being on our streets. Stepping out into the parking lot, Baird lit a cigarette. The night air was cool and clear. He looked up at the stars the boy had talked so enthusiastically about and saw nothing special about them. Just distant points of light, meaningless and cold, like the justice he had just served. Lamar sat on the hard bench in the holding cell, trying to make sense of what had happened. The walls pressed down on him, time stretched to infinity. He couldn't believe he was here, in a place he'd always thought was for real criminals. There were two others in the cell besides him, an elderly homeless man snoring in the corner, and a middle-aged man with a face swollen with drunkenness. Neither one posed a threat, but the situation itself was unsettling. Lamar thought about his telescope. Officer Baird had confiscated it as evidence. What would happen to it? 2 years of saving, part-time jobs, giving up new clothes and popular gadgets, all for an instrument that was now probably carelessly abandoned in the evidence room. What worried him most was his mother. What would she think when she found out in the morning that her son was with the police? Chanel Whitmore was a strict but fair woman. She'd raised 2 children alone after their father died in a car accident 7 years ago, working 2 jobs to provide them with a decent life and education. Lamar didn't want to add to her problems. Hey, smartass! The guard tapped his baton on the bars. Your finest hour has arrived. The detective wants to talk to you. The escort led Lamar down the hallway to a small interrogation room. There, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit was waiting for him, Detective Parker, as he introduced himself. So, Lamar Whitmore, 15 years old, student at Pine Bluff Central High School, no previous trouble with the law, the detective listed, looking through the file. Good grades, especially in science. So what led a model student to rob a convenience store? I didn't rob any store, sir, Lamar said firmly. I was stargazing in a vacant lot. I have a telescope and dated observation records. I couldn't physically have been in that store. Parker leaned back in his chair, studying the boy. Unlike Baird, he didn't jump to conclusions. Officer Baird claims he spotted you running away from the store. He also found burglars' tools on you. That's not true, Lamar exclaimed indignantly. I only had a telescope, a notebook, and a star map. I've been in a vacant lot 3 blocks from the store for over 2 hours. You can check my notes. There are timestamps for each observation. Parker made a note. Something in the boy's confidence made him doubt Baird's version. Were there any witnesses who can confirm that you were in the vacant lot at that time? Lamar shook his head. No, sir. There was no one there. That's why I chose that location. Less light interference for observation. Convenient, Parker remarked, but without malice. He was simply stating a fact. Look, Detective, Lamar leaned forward. I know how it looks, but I'm really into astronomy. I dream of becoming an astrophysicist. My telescope costs $800. I've been saving up for it for 2 years. Why would I risk my future to rob some store? Parker listened intently. There was logic in the boy's words, but against them stood the statement of an experienced officer. I'll check your story, he said at last. In the meantime, you'll have to stay here. We've contacted your mother. She's on her way. Lamar felt both relieved and anxious at the same time. His mom would believe him, but the situation was still serious. 20 minutes later, Chanel Whitmore burst into the room, a short woman with a proud posture and a penetrating gaze. She was still in her medical uniform, apparently having come straight from the night shift. Lamar, what's going on? She looked at her son, and in her eyes she read a mixture of worry and frustration. Mom, I wasn't doing anything. I was watching the stars through a telescope in the vacant lot when Officer Baird arrested me. He thinks I robbed the store, but I didn't. Chanel turned to the detective. Mr. Parker, right? My son is an honors student. He's never been in trouble with the law. He couldn't have robbed any store. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand your concern, Parker said in a conciliatory tone. But we have a statement from Officer Baird who claims to have seen your son fleeing the scene. And you believe Officer Baird more than you believe my son? The very same Baird who is known for his peculiar views? There was a challenge in Chanel's voice. Parker remained silent. Everyone in the precinct knew of Baird's reputation, but they didn't talk about it openly. I want to see proof, Chanel demanded. And where is my son's telescope? The telescope has been confiscated as potential evidence, Parker replied. Look, Mrs. Whitmore, I'll personally handle the case. If your son is innocent, we'll establish that. If? Chanel's eyes narrowed. My son is innocent, and I'm not leaving here until you check his alibi. Detective Parker, you know me. I've worked in this city for 15 years. I'm not asking for special treatment, I'm asking for justice. Parker sighed. He knew Chanel Whitmore as a respected medical professional, and her son really wasn't like the usual criminals he'd had to deal with. Okay. Let's take a look at your son's records and check them against the time of the robbery. Lamar pulled a tattered notebook from his pocket and held it out to the detective. Parker flipped through the pages filled with neat handwriting with times, coordinates, and names of celestial bodies. Impressive, he admitted. But it doesn't prove you were there at the time of the robbery. I need more than just records. My telescope is set up to track specific stars, Lamar said. It has an electronic log of observations with precise timestamps. If you'll let me show you. Lamar is really into astronomy, Chanel interjected. He's been saving up for this telescope for 2 years. All of his teachers will attest that he's one of the best students in school, especially in science. Parker looked at the married couple in front of him, a mother defending her son, the boy, too smart for his age, and Baird, with his unwavering certainty of the teenager's guilt. I'll talk to the store clerk again, Parker decided, and I'll check the surveillance tapes if there are any. In the meantime, Lamar, you can go home with your mother, but we're not closing the case. Be available for further questions. And the telescope? Lamar asked. It stays with us for now, but I promise it will be treated with care. By the time they left the station, the sky was already brightening. The dawn of a new day was approaching, one that promised to be no less challenging than the night that had ended. Lamar, are you telling me the truth? Chanel asked as they got into the car. Yes, Mom. I swear, I was just watching the stars. I would never rob a store. Chanel looked at her son carefully, and her gaze softened. I believe you, but we have a serious fight ahead of us. Officer Baird isn't one to admit his mistakes easily. I know, but I have proof. If only the detective would let me show you the telescope settings. We'll find a way to prove your innocence, Chanel said firmly. But right now, you need to get some rest, and I need to find a good lawyer. They drove home in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Lamar looked out the window at the pale stars. Yesterday they had seemed to him friendly companions, an endless opportunity for exploration and discovery. Today they seemed distant and indifferent to his problems. But somewhere deep inside, Lamar knew that the truth was on his side, and sooner or later, the stars he so loved to watch would show him the path to justice. 3 days after his arrest, Lamar sat on a worn couch in the reception area of the public defender's office. Chanel tapped her foot nervously on the floor, glancing occasionally at her watch. "Mom, stop it, you're making me nervous," Lamar said quietly. "I'm sorry, honey." Chanel put a hand on his shoulder. "I just can't believe they pressed charges, despite all the inconsistencies." Detective Parker had informed them yesterday that the district attorney had decided to charge Lamar with robbery after all. The store clerk, an elderly man named Walter Greenwood, confirmed Baird's version of events by identifying Lamar from a photograph. The store's security cameras appeared to be malfunctioning, too convenient a coincidence, according to Chanel. Mr. and Miss Whitmore. A young woman came into the reception area with a pile of folders in her hands. "My name is Tamana Choudhury. I'll be representing Lamar." Chanel gave her a skeptical look. Tamana was short, with dark skin and expressive eyes. Her hair was gathered in a tight bundle, and her austere suit contrasted with her young face. She looked to be no more than 30, too young for a serious criminal case. "Are you an experienced lawyer?" Chanel asked cautiously, shaking her outstretched hand. Tamana smiled, as if she was used to such a response. "I graduated from the University of Chicago Law School 4 years ago. I worked in the Chicago prosecutor's office for 2 years, then decided to switch to the defense side. I'm new to Pine Bluff, but I assure you, I have enough experience for Lamar's case." She turned to the teenager and extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, Lamar." Lamar shook her hand. Unlike his mother, he felt an instant trust in the lawyer. "Let's go into my office," Tamana suggested. "We have much to discuss." The office was small but surprisingly neat. Diplomas and certificates hung on the walls, and the shelves were littered with legal reference books. On the desk, besides the standard folders and computer, was a picture of a smiling Indian family. "So, I've studied your case," Tamana began as they sat down. "And to be honest, I have some serious questions about your investigative methods." "So you believe us?" Chanel asked hopefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, my job is not to believe or disbelieve. My job is to ensure Lamar has a fair defense," Tamana replied professionally, but then her tone softened. "But if you're asking for my personal opinion, yes, Lamar's story sounds plausible, and Officer Baird's actions raise questions." She opened the case file. "Let's start with the facts. Lamar, tell me in your own words what happened that night." Lamar recounted the events in detail, from the time he set up the telescope to the arrest. Tamana listened intently, taking notes. "Now I want to hear about your fascination with astronomy," she said abruptly. "How long have you been doing it?" Lamar blinked in surprise, but began to tell her. His face perked up as he talked about his first telescope, a cheap model his father had given him the year before he died, about how he started working part-time to buy a more serious instrument, about the astronomy books he borrowed from the library, about the summer camp for future astronomers he'd gotten into on a scholarship last year. Tamana nodded without interrupting. When Lamar finished, she smiled. "You're really good at this, and that will be our main argument. But first I need to see your telescope and notebook." "The police still have the telescope," Chanel sighed. "I'll file a request to see it," Tamana said confidently. "In the meantime, I need copies of all your astronomy records, Lamar. School projects, awards, teacher recommendations, anything that can attest to your serious hobby." "We'll have a preliminary hearing in a week," the attorney continued. "That's where it will be decided whether the case will go to trial. The prosecutor will push for a transfer to juvenile court, but we'll fight for a full dismissal of the case for lack of a crime." "What are our chances?" Chanel asked bluntly. Tamana thought for a moment. "Honestly, in this town, against an officer with 20 years' experience, not as high as I'd like to think. But we have advantages. Lamar's impeccable reputation, his obvious passion for astronomy, and the fact that the evidence against him is circumstantial and weak. But the witness identified me, Lamar reminded him. From the photograph Officer Baird showed him, Tamana emphasized. We're going to insist on a proper identification procedure with multiple suspects, and I really want to see the surveillance footage from the neighboring stores. Maybe they caught the real robber. The meeting continued for another hour. Tamana explained in detail how the juvenile justice system worked, what rights Lamar had, and what defense strategy she planned to use. I have one more question, Chanel said as they were about to leave. Why did you take this case? You probably have a lot of other clients. Tamana hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly. I had a similar case in Chicago. A young man wrongly accused based on racial profiling. We lost. The system proved to be stronger. I've since promised myself that I would fight such injustice with every means at my disposal. Chanel nodded. She understood that kind of motivation all too well. I'll see you at the preliminary hearing, Tamana said, shaking their hands. In the meantime, Lamar, stay out of trouble and prepare materials about your passion for astronomy. That evening, Chanel sat at the kitchen table, languidly stirring the cooled tea. In front of her lay the bills: rent, health insurance, electricity. Now the cost of the lawsuit had been added to them. Tamana worked as a public defender, but there were other expenses as well: appraisals, copies of documents, possible liens. Lamar's muffled voice came from the room. He was helping his younger sister with her math homework. Kia, a 10-year-old copy of her brother, adored Lamar and fully believed in his innocence. To her, her brother was a hero, smart, kind, always willing to help. Mom? Lamar appeared in the kitchen doorway. Kia finished her homework. Can she watch cartoons? Sure, honey. Chanel smiled tiredly. Just not too late. Lamar nodded and was about to leave, but stopped when he noticed the look on his mother's face. It's going to be okay, Mom. Miss Choudhury knows what she's doing. I know, Lamar. It's just that sometimes the world isn't fair to people like us. Then we have to change the world, Lamar said with sudden firmness. That's what Daddy always said, remember? Chanel looked at her son, and her heart squeezed with pride and pain. At 15, he already had a wisdom that many do not attain, even by old age. Yes, your father was a wise man, she said quietly, and he would have been very proud of you. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Tamana Choudhury sat in her small rental apartment, surrounded by documents on the Lamar case. She had moved to Pine Bluff only 2 months ago, away from the hustle and bustle of Chicago and the painful memories of lost cases and broken fortunes. The small southern town seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. The public defender's office was in desperate need of qualified attorneys, and she needed a place where her work would matter. But within the first few weeks, Tamana realized that provincial Arkansas was no better than Chicago when it came to systemic injustice. Here she was, more visible, one of the few immigrant lawyers, and a woman at that. Every word, every action was scrutinized and criticized. Tamana opened her laptop and began researching information on Officer Baird. She needed to know the enemy, Randall Baird, 52 years old, 20 years of service with the Pine Bluff Police Department. Several commendations for service, 2 reprimands for abuse of authority, both involving the use of force on black suspects. Otherwise, an exemplary record. This case isn't going to be easy, she muttered, making notes. Tamana remembered Lamar's eyes, intelligent, clear, full of bewilderment at the injustice. She'd seen kids like that in Chicago, talented, bright, but born with the wrong skin color and in the wrong neighborhood. The system either broke them or threw them to the margins of life. Not this time, she told herself firmly. Not with this boy. The preliminary hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Tamana had a week to gather all the necessary evidence and build a line of defense. She knew it would be a battle not only for Lamar, but also against the entrenched prejudices of a small southern town. The next morning, Tamana traveled to Lamar's school. She needed testimony from the teachers about his passion for astronomy and his general character. Pine Bluff Central School was a typical American institution, Brick building, sports fields, teenagers in colorful clothes rushing to class. Tamana headed straight for the principal's office. Mr. Jenkins, the school's principal, appeared to be a full man with thinning hair and a shrewd eye. He listened to Tamana with polite attention. "Lamar Whitmore is one of our top students," he said, looking over his personnel file. "Steady, excellent grades, especially in science. Was captain of the school chess team last year. No disciplinary problems." "What about his passion for astronomy?" Tamana asked. "Oh, that's his passion," the principal perked up. "You should talk to Mr. Ellison, our physics teacher. He oversees the science club where Lamar is the star, if I may say so." Mr. Ellison, a thin man in his 40s with an eccentric beard, spoke of Lamar with undisguised enthusiasm. "That boy is a true genius, Miss Chaudhry. His understanding of astrophysics surpasses that of most college students. He won the Regional Science Olympiad last year with a project on mapping the motion of small celestial bodies. You know what I mean? A 15-year-old doing NASA-level research. And he was actually able to make astronomical observations that night? Absolutely. Lamar observes the stars on a regular basis. He has access to the school observatory, but he prefers to work with his own telescope. Says he calibrated it to his needs." "What about his character? Could he have committed the robbery?" Ellison looked at her like she was crazy. "Lamar Whitmore? A robber? Miss Chaudhry, that boy once found a wallet full of money in the school hallway and spent 2 hours looking for the owner, even though he could have just turned it in to the lost and found. He helps younger students with their homework. He dreams of NASA and the space program. The teacher shook his head. "Accusing him of robbery is like accusing the librarian of organizing underground fights." Tamana carefully recorded the statement. She got recommendations from 3 other teachers, all of whom spoke highly of Lamar. Her next stop was Greenwood's store, the scene of the alleged crime. The small mini-mart on the street corner looked unremarkable. Tamana stepped inside and the bell above the door jingled melodiously. Standing behind the counter was Walter Greenwood himself, a gray-haired man with a wrinkled face and a tenacious gaze from under his bushy eyebrows. "What can I do for you?" he asked as Tamana approached the counter. "Mr. Greenwood, my name is Tamana Chaudhry. I'm the attorney for Lamar Whitmore, the teenager who is accused of robbing your store." The man's face changed instantly, becoming wary and unapproachable. "I have nothing to say. I've already given my statement to the police." "I understand, sir, but I'd like to ask a few clarifying questions, if you don't mind." "I've identified the robber," Greenwood retorted. "That's all you need to know." "Mr. Greenwood, you identified him from the photograph Officer Baird showed you, correct?" "What difference does it make? I recognized him." "Big difference. Proper identification procedure involves a lineup with multiple suspects to rule out error." Greenwood frowned. "Look, I know what I saw, and I told the truth. I don't doubt your sincerity, sir, but human memory is imperfect, especially under stressful situations. Could you describe to me exactly what happened during the robbery?" Greenwood sighed, realizing that there was no getting away from the lawyer so easily. "It was about 12:30. I was about to close the store when a guy in dark clothes with a hoodie walked in. He walked up to the counter, pulled out a knife, and demanded money from the till. I gave him the proceeds, about $300. He took the money and ran out. Did you see his face?" "Not very well. The hood was pulled up, but I'm pretty sure it was a black teenager." "Mr. Greenwood, there are a lot of black teenagers in the neighborhood. Are you sure it was Lamar Whitmore specifically?" Greenwood hesitated, and Tamana caught a shadow of doubt in his eyes. "Officer Baird said he caught him near the store with the loot." "With a telescope, Mr. Greenwood. Lamar Whitmore is a keen astronomer who used to watch the stars in a vacant lot 3 blocks from here." I don't know. Maybe it was him, maybe it wasn't," Greenwood finally admitted. "It all happened so fast." Tamana nodded. That was exactly what she needed to hear. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Greenwood. One more question. Why weren't the security cameras working?" "They broke down a week before the robbery. I kept waiting for the technician to fix them." "A convenient coincidence for a burglar," Tamana observed. "Exactly," Greenwood nodded. "You know, my first thought was that it was someone local who knew about the cameras not working. Like Jason Baird, for instance?" Tamana suggested cautiously. Greenwood shuddered. An officer's nephew? Why are you asking about him? Just a guess. Does he come into your store often? He used to, but I forbade him to come in after I caught him stealing a month ago. I didn't report him, I respect his uncle, but I warned him I'd go to the police next time. Tamana mentally noted this information. The puzzle was beginning to come together. Tamana sat in her office, surrounded by Lamar's case files. On the desk were witness statements, police reports, and school character references. She had gathered an impressive amount of information over the past 3 days, but she still felt that something was missing. Irrefutable proof of Lamar's innocence. There was a knock on the door, and Lamar and Chanel entered the office. The boy held a bulky folder in his hands. "Good morning," Tamana greeted them. "Apparently you brought the materials I asked for?" Lamar nodded and placed the folder on the table. "Here are all my astronomy projects from the last 3 years, certificates from the Olympiads, printouts of astronomical observations, and letters of recommendation from the summer camp science director." Tamana began to look through the documents, and her eyes widened with surprise. The papers in front of her were not just schoolwork, but serious scientific research. Lamar's paper on the possibility of exoplanets in the Proxima Centauri system had been published in a specialized journal for young scientists. His project on the influence of solar activity on the Earth's magnetic field won first place at the regional Olympiad. "That's impressive," she said sincerely. "You're really passionate about astronomy." "It's my life," Lamar replied simply. "I dream of working for NASA or a private space company, exploring things that no one else has explored yet." "What about your telescope? Tell me more about it." Lamar's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "It's a modified Celestron Nexstar 6SE. I bought the base model, but then modified it by replacing the eyepiece with a more powerful one, adding solar filters and a digital camera adapter. Most importantly, I reprogrammed the control system, creating my own object tracking software." "And how much did this telescope cost?" "The base model cost me $600. I spent about $200 more on modifications. I saved up for 2 years, washing cars, mowing lawns, helping neighbors with their computers." Tamana wrote down his words, mentally building a line of defense. "Tell me, Lamar, does your telescope require an operator to be present at all times, or can it be set up and left to operate automatically?" "That's a complicated question," Lamar pondered. "Theoretically, modern computerized telescopes can operate automatically, but mine is a special case. Because of the modifications I've made, the system is more advanced but also more capricious. It requires constant manual correction. In addition, I've reprogrammed the tracking system so that it only works when I'm actively interacting with the operator. That's my defense against theft." Tamana raised an eyebrow. "You mean no one but you could use your telescope? More specifically, no one who isn't familiar with my modifications. I created a unique sequence of commands to launch and control it. It's like a personal password, only in the form of physical actions with the device." "This could be a key part of our defense," Tamana said slowly. "If we can prove that the telescope could not operate without your immediate presence." "Miss Chaudhry," Chanel interjected, "the police are still holding the telescope as physical evidence. How will we be able to show its features?" "I've filed a motion to inspect the physical evidence. Hopefully we'll have access by Friday," Tamana replied. "In the meantime, Lamar, I want you to prepare a detailed description of how your telescope works, with all the technical details, preferably with diagrams. This will help us bring in a technical expert if necessary." Lamar nodded. "I could even do a video demonstration on the school telescope, show the basic principles of operation, and then explain how mine is different." "Great idea," Tamana approved. "Now, let's discuss the upcoming preliminary hearing. It will be our first chance to show the prosecution's weakness." They spent the next hour discussing strategy. Tamana was impressed with Lamar's sharp mind. He was quick to grasp legal concepts and offer logical counterarguments to the prosecution's possible claims. "You know, Lamar," she said as they were ending the meeting, "you'd make a great lawyer." The boy smiled. "Thanks, but I prefer to study the stars rather than the law." "Fair enough. though I must say both require an analytical mind and attention to detail. And don't forget ethics, Lamar added. In science, as in law, it's not only what you do, but why you do it that matters. Tamana looked at him in surprise. The 15-year-old had just expressed a philosophical concept that many of her fellow lawyers had not internalized in their entire careers. With Lamar and Chanel gone, Tamana decided to tackle another important aspect of the case, the identity of Officer Baird. She already knew about his reputation and 2 reprimands for abuse of authority, but she needed more. She called her contact at the police department, a young officer named Rodriguez, whom she'd met while working on another case. "Hi, Tamana," Rodriguez greeted her. "I can guess why you're calling. The Whitmore case?" "That's right. What can you tell me about Randall Baird?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "This is not an easy conversation to have on the phone. Why don't we meet at Donna's Cafe in an hour?" "Deal." Donna's Cafe was a cozy place on the outskirts of Pine Bluff that was rarely visited by police officers. Tamana took a table in the corner and waited, sipping her coffee. Rodriguez showed up exactly at the appointed time, glancing around nervously. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," Tamana said as he sat down across from her. "Don't thank me. I'm risking my career," he spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "Baird is a powerful figure in the department. He has connections in both the DA's office and the mayor's office. All the more reason I need to know who I'm dealing with." Rodriguez sighed. "Baird, he's old school. 20 years ago, these types of practices were considered the norm. Intimidating suspects, fabricating evidence, racial profiling. Times have changed now, but not Baird." "You think he fabricated the case against Lamar?" "I can't say that for sure, but I do know that Baird is particularly attentive to black teenagers, considers them all potential criminals, and importantly in this case, he's very close to his nephew Jason." "Jason Baird?" Tamana leaned forward. "The same one Mr. Greenwood caught stealing a month ago?" Rodriguez looked at her in surprise. "You know already?" "Yeah, that's the one. Jason's a troubled kid. Drugs, petty theft, fights. But every time Uncle Randall gets him out, no formal charges, just warnings and promises to straighten up." "What about the night Greenwood's store was robbed?" "Officially, Jason was at home. His mother, Baird's sister, confirmed it. But," Rodriguez hesitated. "But, I was patrolling the neighborhood around 11 p.m. and saw someone very similar to Jason near Greenwood's store. I can't say for sure. It was dark and I was in my car, but the resemblance was strong." Tamana took careful note of this information. "Rodriguez, are you willing to repeat that under oath?" The officer turned pale. "God, no. It would destroy my career. I'm already risking it by telling you this. I understand, but if this goes to trial and I call you as a witness, then I will tell the truth. But please only use it as a last resort." Tamana nodded. "Thank you for your honesty. One more question. What do you know about Baird's friendship with Prosecutor Dawson?" "Oh, it's a well-known story. They've been friends since high school. Weekend fishing trips, Independence Day barbecues, godfathers of each other's kids. Classic small-town picture, everybody's connected, everybody covers for each other. And Dawson's not likely to dig deep if Baird brings him a suspect?" "Exactly. Especially if that suspect is the perfect patsy to divert attention away from the real culprit." Tamana tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notepad. That explains why the case went to prosecution so quickly, despite the weak evidence. The next day, Tamana got permission to examine the physical evidence. She and Lamar went to the police station, where the telescope and other seized items were waiting for them in a special room. When Lamar saw his telescope, his face changed. "They didn't store it properly," he exclaimed, examining the instrument. "The lenses are supposed to be covered with protective caps, and they left them open. And look, the focusing mechanism is bent." Tamana took several photos of the damage. "Can you tell if the telescope is working?" Lamar carefully checked the basic functions of the device. "The basic mechanisms seem to be fine, but we need to check the pointing accuracy and software operation. That will require a power connection and a test run." "Can we do that now?" "Theoretically, yes, but not here. The telescope requires special conditions for calibration, an open space with a view of the sky, ideally at night." Tamana turned to the officer present. We would like permission to temporarily remove the telescope to test its performance. This is a key point for the defense. That's not possible, the officer retorted. Evidence cannot leave the vault without specific authorization from the judge. Then we will file a motion to that effect. That evening, Tamana was working on the motion when her phone rang. It was Detective Parker. Miss Chaudhry, I have information that may interest you, he said without preamble. I've reviewed the surveillance tapes from the bank across from Greenwood's store. They don't cover the entrance to the store, but they do show part of the street. And on the night of the robbery, at about 12:30, the cameras caught a young man running from the direction of the store. And it wasn't Lamar Whitmore? Tamana guessed. The quality of the footage isn't great, but the figure and clothing don't match. Lamar is taller and slimmer, and the man on the tape is stocky and shorter in stature. Did you show this tape to D.A. Dawson? Tried to. He said it was too fuzzy and had no probative value. But you think otherwise, or you wouldn't have called me. A pause. I think there's something wrong with this case, Miss Chaudhry, and I prefer to convict the guilty to the innocent. May I have a copy of that tape? Not officially, no. But if you file a request with the court for disclosure of the entire case file, I won't object. Thank you, Detective. I appreciate your honesty. Don't thank me. I'm just doing my job. The day before the preliminary hearing, Tamana met with Prosecutor Dawson in his office. Hank Dawson was a large man with graying temples and the cocky smile of a man used to winning. Miss Chaudhry, he indicated her chair. To what do I owe the honor? I've come to discuss the Lamar Whitmore case, Mr. Dawson. I have reason to believe that the charges against him should be dropped. Dawson grinned. Oh, really? And what led you to that thought? First, the weak identification by the witness. Mr. Greenwood admitted to me that he wasn't sure Lamar was the robber. He was sure when he testified to Officer Baird. After Baird showed him a single photograph instead of the proper lineup for identification. That's a violation of procedure. A minor violation. Dawson brushed it off. Second, Lamar has an alibi. He was watching the stars in a vacant lot 3 blocks from the store. He has observation records with precise timestamps, which he could have made beforehand or afterward. Third, the footage from the bank camera across from the store shows a fleeing man who doesn't match Lamar's physique. For a moment, Dawson's face changed. Detective Parker was talking to you. Fourth, and most importantly, I have reason to believe the real robber was Jason Baird, Officer Baird's nephew, whom Mr. Greenwood caught stealing a month ago and banned from his store. Dawson went black. That's a serious accusation, Miss Chaudhry. Do you have proof of it? Enough to raise a reasonable doubt, and that, as you know, is enough for an acquittal. The prosecutor stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to her. What do you want? A dismissal of all charges against Lamar Whitmore and a real investigation into the robbery. That's impossible. The case is already in the system. If I drop the charges without good reason, it will raise questions. Even if it means prosecuting an innocent man? Dawson turned to her. Look, Miss Chaudhry, you're a new person in our town, so I'm going to give you some advice. Don't go against the system. It's stronger than you are. Mr. Dawson, with all due respect, it's my job to protect my client no matter who I have to face. Then I'll see you in court tomorrow, Dawson said coldly. And let me warn you, do not make baseless accusations against honorable members of our community. There may be consequences. Tamana stood up. Is that a threat, Mr. Dawson? It's friendly advice, Miss Chaudhry. See you tomorrow. Walking out of the prosecutor's office, Tamana took a deep breath. She had expected resistance, but not this blatant. Dawson was clearly willing to go all the way to protect Baird and his nephew. That evening, Tamana gathered Lamar and Chanel in her office for final preparations for the hearing. I wasn't able to convince Dawson to drop the charges, she said honestly. But I made him nervous. He knows we're digging for Jason Baird. What does that mean for Lamar? Chanel asked. It means there's going to be a battle tomorrow. They're going to try to get a quick hearing and get the case into juvenile court. Our job is to convince the judge that there isn't enough evidence to even bring charges. And if that doesn't work? Lamar asked quietly. Then we'll continue the fight in court. Tamana said firmly. Lamar, I want you to be prepared that you may be asked some uncomfortable questions tomorrow. The prosecutor will try to provoke you, make you look guilty, or just knock you out. I understand. The main thing is to tell the truth and stay calm. Don't let them make you angry or upset. If you don't know how to answer, look at me, and I'll decide if you need to object to the question. Lamar nodded. What about the telescope? Will we be able to demonstrate its operation? Not yet, no. The judge denied our motion, citing that it's not necessary at the preliminary hearing stage. But I'm not giving up. If the case goes to trial, I'll insist on a full demonstration. I've prepared the technical description as you requested. Lamar held out a folder of documents to her. Here are all the specifics of how my telescope works, with diagrams and photographs. Tamana looked through the materials. This is excellent, Lamar. I'll add this to our evidence. I've also prepared testimonies from your teachers about your character and passion for astronomy. Miss Choudhury, Chanel took her hand. We are grateful for all you do for Lamar. I know it's not easy going against the system in this town, especially when you... She blanched. A black immigrant woman? Tamana finished with a slight smile. Yes, that adds to the difficulty, but it also adds determination. I believe in justice, Mrs. Whitmore, and I believe in Lamar's innocence. And that's powerful motivation. When Lamar and Chanel left, Tamana spent a few more hours working on her speech for tomorrow's hearing. She knew her chances were slim. The system was rigged against her and her client. But she also knew that every system had weaknesses, and tomorrow she was going to find them. The Pine Bluff County Courthouse was an imposing brick colonial-style building, with columns at the entrance and flags swaying lazily in the morning wind. Tamana walked up the steps with Lamar and Chanel, feeling the heaviness of the day ahead. Remember what we discussed, she said quietly to Lamar. Stay calm, answer clearly and honestly, and don't let Dawson make you lose your temper. Lamar nodded. He was dressed in a strict dark blue suit that made him look older and more serious. Chanel, too, looked impeccable in her conservative dress and neatly styled hair. No bright colors or jewelry that might cause prejudice to the jury. People were already gathering in the courtroom, reporters from the local paper, a few curious townspeople, uniformed police officers who had come to support Baird. Tamana noticed that not only Dawson was sitting on the prosecution bench, but also his assistant, a young man with an aggressive look and a folder full of documents. They're serious, she thought as she headed for the defense table. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff announced, "Stand up. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Mortimer Coltrane presiding." Judge Coltrane was a tall, lean man in his 60s, with shrewd gray eyes and a reputation for strict but fair judgment. He looked around the room with an attentive gaze and nodded. Be seated. Case number 532, State v. Lamar Whitmore, charge of armed robbery of a convenience store. Are the parties ready? The prosecution is ready, Your Honor, Dawson said confidently. The defense is ready, Your Honor, Tamana replied. We will proceed to jury selection, the judge announced. The jury selection process took almost the entire day. Tamana watched the candidates carefully, asking questions that revealed possible biases. Dawson, for his part, methodically turned away all non-white candidates and anyone who had a college degree or expressed an interest in science. By the end of the day, the jury pool was set. 10 whites and 2 Hispanics, 8 men and 4 women. Not a single black person. This is a bad sign, Chanel whispered as she watched the jury swear in. We'll be fine, Tamana replied confidently, although she inwardly shared Chanel's concern. The next morning, the court resumed deliberations. Judge Coltrane gave the prosecution the floor for opening statements. Dawson stood up, pulled on his jacket, and strode confidently toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the case before us today seems simple at first glance. On the evening of October 12th, a young man with a gun entered Walter Greenwood's store, threatened the proprietor, and stole $327. Thanks to the vigilance of Officer Randall Baird, the suspect was apprehended near the scene of the crime. He paused, looking around the jury theatrically. But the defense will try to convince you that there's been a mistake, that the defendant, Lamar Whitmore, was not robbing a store but was practicing astronomy. Several jurors exchanged skeptical glances, which was what Dawson wanted. You will hear the testimony of a respected police officer with 20 years of experience. You will hear testimony from a victim who identified the perpetrator. You will see the evidence seized at the time of the arrest. And after that, you will have no doubt about the defendant's guilt. Dawson returned to his seat, clearly pleased with the effect he had produced. The defense has the floor, the judge announced. Tamana rose leisurely and approached the jury. She knew that first impressions were critical. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tamana Chowdhury, and I represent Lamar Whitmore, a 15-year-old high school student who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mr. Dawson is right about one thing. This case is really simple. Simple because Lamar is innocent, and the evidence of his innocence is obvious to anyone willing to see it. She paused, giving the jury a chance to consider Lamar, a calm, serious boy, so unlike the stereotypical teenage delinquent. In the course of this trial, you will learn that Lamar is not just an ordinary high school student. He is a gifted young scientist who is passionate about astronomy, so much so that he worked for 2 years after school to buy a professional telescope. You'll learn that on the night of the alleged robbery, he was actually stargazing in a vacant lot 3 blocks from the store. You'll hear testimonials from his teachers about his impeccable character and scientific accomplishments. Tamana looked around at the jurors, noting that some of them were already showing interest. But most importantly, you will see how quickly the prosecution's case falls apart upon closer examination. Conflicting testimony, procedural irregularities, lack of direct evidence, and possibly prejudice based on racial stereotypes. The prosecution calls its first witness, Officer Randall Baird, Dawson announced. Baird walked to the witness stand with the confident gait of a man accustomed to attention. In uniform, with his badges polished to a shine, he looked the epitome of law and order. After taking the oath of office, Dawson began his questioning. Officer Baird, please tell us about the events of the evening of October 12th. I was patrolling the south side of town when at approximately 23:45, I received a report of a robbery at Greenwood's store. Upon arrival, I received a description of the suspect, a black juvenile wearing dark clothing. Started patrolling the nearby streets, and about 10 minutes later, I spotted the suspect running from the direction of the store. Was it the defendant, Lamar Whitmore? Yes, it was him. I recognized him immediately as I approached. What did you do next? I stopped him and asked him what he was doing out so late. He started to tell some story about stars and a telescope, but his nervous demeanor gave him away. Tamana noticed Lamar tense up. Baird's story was already at odds with what had actually happened. She placed a hand on his shoulder reassuringly. Did you search the suspect? Dawson continued. Yes. In his backpack, I found a flashlight, gloves, and an unusual device that he claimed was a telescope. There was also a notebook with some notes in it. Did you find any money? No, he didn't have any money on him. I assume he had time to hide it somewhere nearby or pass it on to an accomplice. Tamana wrote down every word, noting contradictions and unfounded assumptions. Thank you, Officer Baird. No further questions, Dawson concluded. The defense may cross-examine, Judge Coltrane announced. Tamana stood up and leisurely approached the witness. Officer Baird, you said you spotted the suspect running from the direction of the store. How far away from the store was that? About 2 blocks away. So the suspect had already moved 2 blocks away from the store by the time you spotted him? Yes, it appears so. And you said he was running. Lamar Whitmore was actually running when you saw him. Baird hesitated a little. Well, maybe not running, but walking fast, obviously trying to get away. Officer Baird, according to your original report you wrote, and I quote, the suspect was seen fleeing the scene. Now you're saying he didn't run. Which of these is true? Objection! Dawson jumped in. Counsel is misrepresenting the witness's testimony. Overruled, replied the judge. Witness, answer the question. Baird straightened up. He was moving suspiciously fast, maybe not running in the full sense of the word, but definitely trying to get away quickly. I see, Tamana nodded. And you said you recognized him as Lamar Whitmore immediately when you approached. How far away were you when it happened? About 30 meters, maybe 40. And at that distance, in the dark, you determined with certainty that it was Lamar Whitmore? I have good eyesight, Baird answered smugly, So good that you can identify a man in the dark at a distance of 40 meters? That's amazing. Tell me, were you acquainted with Lamar before this incident? No, I was not personally acquainted. Then how could you recognize him? Baird was beginning to get nervous. I'd seen him in the neighborhood before, and as I drove closer, I got a good look at his face. Did you notice that he had a telescope with him? Yes, some kind of device he called a telescope. And that device actually turned out to be a professional astronomical telescope, correct? So he claimed. Not so he claimed, but so it is, Officer Baird. It's been confirmed by forensics. Tell me, if Lamar had really robbed the store, why would he take a bulky telescope worth $800 with him? Objection! Dawson jumped in again. Counsel is asking the witness to speculate. Sustained, nodded the judge. Restate the question, Miss Choudhury. Officer Baird, you claim to have found a flashlight and gloves in Lamar's backpack, described as burglar's tools. Are these common items for someone engaged in nighttime astronomical observations? I don't know. I'm not an astronomer. Baird snapped back. Lamar leaned over and whispered to Tamana, Ask him about the type of flashlight. It's a special astronomical lantern with a red light. Tamana nodded and continued. Was it a regular flashlight, Officer Baird? No, some kind of special one with a red light. And you didn't find it odd that a robber would use a flashlight with a red light? Don't you know what such flashlights are used for? No, I don't know, Baird admitted. They are special astronomical flashlights that do not impair night vision when observing the stars. They are used exclusively by astronomers and scientists. Several of the jurors glanced over, clearly interested in this information. One last question, Officer Baird. Do you know a man named Jason Baird? Baird's face changed instantly. Yes, that's my nephew. And where was your nephew the night of the robbery of Greenwood's store? At home, with his mother. But that has nothing to do with the case. Objection! Dawson almost shouted. It is totally irrelevant and is an attempt to defame the witness. Judge Coltrane frowned. Sustained. Miss Choudhury, refrain from such questions. I have no further questions, Tamana said calmly, returning to her seat. The next prosecution witness was Walter Greenwood. The elderly store owner looked unsure, shuffling from foot to foot at the witness stand. After the standard questions about the witness's identity, Dawson cut to the chase. Mr. Greenwood, tell the court what happened on the evening of October 12th in your store. I was just about to close. It was about 12:30. A young fellow came in wearing dark clothes with a hood over his head. He came up to the counter, pulled out a knife, and demanded money from the till. I gave him the proceeds, about $300. He took the money and ran away. Did you see the robber's face? Greenwood blanched. Not very well. It was dark, and the hood covered most of his face. But you were able to identify the suspect? Officer Baird showed me a picture of the detainee, and I said it could have been him. You identified Lamar Whitmore as the man who robbed your store? Greenwood looked at Lamar, then at Baird, then back at Lamar. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I told the officer it looked like a robber. Dawson clearly wasn't satisfied with that answer. Mr. Greenwood, in your statement to the police, you were more certain. What has changed? Nothing has changed. I just don't want to accuse an innocent man. I didn't see the robber's face well enough to be absolutely sure. I have no further questions, Dawson said sullenly. Tamana stood up for cross-examination, pleased with Greenwood's uncertainty. Mr. Greenwood, you said Officer Baird showed you a photograph of Lamar Whitmore. Was that the only photograph, or were you shown several photographs of different people? Just one picture. Officer Baird said he caught the suspect near the store and asked if it was him. And how did that go down? The officer just showed the picture and asked, "Is that him?" Roughly like that, yes. Mr. Greenwood, are you aware that this identification procedure is contrary to standard police protocols and could result in a false identification? No, I was not aware. Tell me, are you sure the robber was a black teenager? I'm sure it was a young man with dark skin. It's hard to tell the exact age. How tall was the robber? Greenwood hesitated. Average height, maybe 170 centimeters. Lamar Whitmore is 185 centimeters tall. That's well above average. Do you still think it could have been him? Not sure. The robber seemed shorter, but he could have been slouching. Lamar leaned toward Tamana again and whispered, "Ask him about Jason. He knows his height." Tamana nodded. "Mr. Greenwood, do you know Jason Baird, Officer Baird's nephew?" "Yes, I do." "How tall is he?" "About 170 centimeters. And you've had trouble with Jason Baird in the past, haven't you?" Greenwood glanced nervously at Baird, who sat stone-faced. "Yes, there was an incident. I caught him shoplifting about a month before the robbery." "Did you report it to the police?" "No, I decided not to make a fuss. I just banned him from the store." "And how did he react?" "He threatened me, said I'd be sorry." There was silence in the courtroom. Dawson looked like he was ready to explode, but remained silent, realizing that objecting would only draw more attention to the testimony. "Thank you, Mr. Greenwood," Tamana said calmly. "I have no further questions." After the lunch break, the prosecution called in a forensic expert who confirmed that no fingerprints or DNA were found on the telescope or Lamar's other belongings linking him to the robbery. Nor was any of the stolen money recovered. Lamar continually took notes, analyzing witness statements and pointing out logical inconsistencies to Tamana. His calm, focused demeanor contrasted markedly with Baird's nervousness and Dawson's aggressive manner. Toward the end of the first day of the trial, the judge adjourned until tomorrow morning. As they left the courtroom, Tamana noticed several jurors watching Lamar with interest. "What do you think?" she asked once they were outside the courthouse. "They're starting to have doubts," Lamar replied. "I saw how some of the jurors reacted to the contradictions in Baird's testimony, and Mr. Greenwood's performance hit the prosecution's case hard." "You're very observant," Tamana smiled. "That helps. Keep analyzing their reactions tomorrow." The next day, the defense's first witness was Lamar's physics teacher, Mr. Ellison. He gave a fiery characterization of his student, describing him as an exceptionally gifted young man with an impeccable reputation and a deep understanding of science. "Mr. Ellison," Tamana asked, "could Lamar Whitmore, in your opinion, have committed armed robbery?" "Absolutely impossible," the teacher replied firmly. "It goes against everything I know about him. Lamar is an honest, hard-working, determined young man. To accuse him of robbery is like accusing a librarian of organizing underground fights." On cross-examination, Dawson tried to undermine the teacher's credibility by hinting at possible bias, but Ellison remained steadfast in his assessment of Lamar. The final day of the trial began with an unusual motion by Tamana Choudhury. She stood up, straightened her back, and addressed the judge confidently. "Your Honor, the defense moves for an unusual demonstration in the courtroom. We wish to present my client's telescope as key evidence of his innocence." Judge Coltrane frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Choudhury, explain to the court how an astronomical instrument can serve as evidence in a robbery case." "With pleasure, Your Honor. The prosecution bases its case on the fact that Lamar Whitmore strayed from his observation post to commit the robbery. However, his telescope requires the constant presence of an operator and cannot operate without direct interaction with him. We wish to demonstrate this in practice." Prosecutor Dawson immediately jumped in. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a circus act, not forensic evidence." The judge hesitated, tapping his fingers on the table. "Miss Choudhury, what exactly would be the point of the demonstration?" "We want to show that Lamar's telescope is equipped with a unique control system that only he knows. It will prove that Lamar could not have left his post at the time of the alleged robbery because the telescope required his presence." Lamar leaned over and whispered something to Tamana. She nodded and continued. "Furthermore, my client is willing to give a demonstration that will conclusively show that even an experienced man cannot operate this instrument without specialized knowledge." Judge Coltrane pondered the situation for several long seconds. "Very well, Miss Choudhury. I'll allow the demonstration, but it must be brief and to the point. Mr. Dawson, your objection is overruled." Dawson slumped angrily in his chair, and Tamana couldn't hide a slight smile. This was their opportunity to turn the tide of the trial. "Bailiff, please bring in Exhibit Number 6, the telescope," the judge ordered. A few minutes later, Lamar's telescope was brought into the courtroom. It was an imposing instrument on a tripod, with many buttons, discs, and switches. Even at first glance, it was obvious that this was not an ordinary amateur telescope, but a serious scientific instrument. Lamar approached his telescope with visible relief, as if he had met an old friend. His hands gently touched the instrument, checking all the details. "Thank you, Your Honor," Tamana said. "Now I would like to call in an expert astronomer, Dr. George Wilkins, to confirm the features of this telescope." Dr. Wilkins, a gray-haired man with thick-rimmed glasses, was a professor of astronomy at the University of Arkansas. He told the court about the modifications Lamar had made to the standard model of the telescope. "This is outstanding work, especially for someone so young," Wilkins said as he examined the instrument. He completely redesigned the tracking system software, added special filters to observe solar activity, and developed a unique calibration system. "And what is your opinion, Dr. Wilkins? Can this telescope operate without an operator present?" Tamana asked. "Absolutely not. This particular instrument requires constant manual correction and observation. If left unattended for even 15 minutes, the system will malfunction and require a complete readjustment." Dawson jumped in for cross-examination. "Dr. Wilkins, couldn't someone else have been operating the telescope instead of Lamar Whitmore on the night of the robbery?" "Theoretically, yes, if that person had a thorough knowledge of astronomy and was familiar with specific modifications of the instrument in question. But practically, it is extremely unlikely." "Then it is possible after all?" Dawson insisted. "Technically, yes, but—" "Thank you, Doctor, that's enough," Dawson interrupted him triumphantly. "So Lamar Whitmore could have left the telescope in the care of an accomplice while he robbed the store himself." A whisper broke out in the courtroom. Tamana saw some of the jurors nodding in agreement with the prosecutor's logic. It was necessary to act decisively. "Your Honor, the defense is offering a practical demonstration," she said. "Have someone in the audience try to set up the Lamar telescope. We'll prove that it's impossible without specialized knowledge." Judge Coltrane hesitated. "All right, but who will volunteer?" "I suggest Officer Baird," Tamana said immediately, "as the man who first discovered the telescope at the scene of the arrest." Baird, clearly not expecting this turn, stood up nervously. "I'm not an expert in astronomy." "No one requires you to be an expert," Tamana smiled. "We just need to show you how difficult this instrument is to operate." Baird reluctantly walked over to the telescope and looked confused at the many buttons and switches. He tried turning one of the discs, but nothing happened. "Why don't you turn it on first?" Lamar suggested from his seat, eliciting chuckles from the audience. Baird blushed and pressed the power button. The telescope hummed quietly, but the display remained dark. "I don't understand. It won't turn on," Baird said irritably. "Because there is a special startup sequence," Tamana explained. "Lamar, could you demonstrate?" Lamar stood up and walked over to the telescope. His hands confidently touched the instrument, and he quickly performed a series of actions. He turned one disc to a certain angle, pressed two buttons simultaneously, then entered some code on a small keypad. The telescope came to life. The display lit up. The motor began to whir quietly. "It's my theft defense," Lamar explained. "The telescope won't work without a special startup sequence that only I know." Dawson didn't give up. "But you could have told that sequence to someone else, a friend or an accomplice." "Why don't you try operating the telescope now that it's on?" Lamar suggested to the prosecutor. "It's a lot harder than it looks." Dawson hesitantly approached the instrument. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" "Just find Jupiter," Lamar said with a slight smile. "It's the brightest planet. Shouldn't be difficult." The prosecutor clumsily spun the control wheels and pressed buttons, but the telescope only moved erratically, obviously unable to find any target. After several minutes of fruitless attempts, Dawson gave up, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "That doesn't prove anything," he snarled. "I'm not an astronomer." "That's exactly what the defense proves," Tamana interjected. "This telescope is so complicated to operate that even an educated person can't handle it without specialized knowledge." She turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, imagine that on the night of the robbery, Lamar allegedly entrusted the operation of this sophisticated instrument to some hypothetical accomplice. Who would that be? Another keen astronomer who happened to be around at midnight and agreed to cover up the robbery? Several jurors smiled, evidently finding such a version absurd. "Your Honor," Lamar said, turning to the judge, "may I offer a more convincing demonstration?" Judge Coltrane nodded. "Go ahead, young man." "I can adjust the telescope with my eyes closed," Lamar said. "That would prove how thoroughly I know my instrument." The idea aroused keen interest in the courtroom. Even the judge looked intrigued. "Proceed," he said. Chanel Whitmore stood up and tied a tight blindfold over her son's eyes. Then the deputy turned off the telescope and even rearranged some of the settings to make the task more difficult. Lamar, with the blindfold on, walked over to the telescope and began work. His fingers flew over buttons and switches with remarkable confidence. He entered the launch sequence, adjusted the coordinates and tilt angle, all the while commenting on his actions. "Right now I'm setting the equatorial coordinates for the Saturn search. We need to take into account the time of year and the exact location. Now adjusting the focus, adding a filter for better visibility of the rings." 3 minutes later, the telescope was fully set up. Lamar removed the blindfold and invited the judge to check the result. Judge Coltrane walked over to the eyepiece and took a look. His face changed from skeptical to surprised. "Indeed, I see a planet with rings. Saturn, I believe." "Yes, Your Honor." Lamar nodded. "And if you will allow me to make one more adjustment, I will show you its satellite Titan." The judge watched with interest as Lamar quickly changed the telescope settings. "Now look again, Your Honor." "Amazing," the judge pronounced, looking away from the eyepiece. "I can actually see a luminous dot near the planet." "That's Titan, Saturn's largest satellite," Lamar explained. "The only satellite in the solar system with a dense atmosphere. Titan's surface is hidden by clouds composed of methane and ethane, and hydrocarbon lakes exist on the surface." The courtroom listened mesmerized to the teenager's explanations, who spoke about astronomy with such passion and knowledge that no one could doubt his sincerity. "Now I can show you something truly amazing," Lamar offered. "Today you can observe the passage of Titan's shadow across Saturn's surface. This is a rare phenomenon, which is exactly what I had planned to observe that night." He adjusted the telescope again, and one by one the jurors came up to look at this astronomical marvel. Their faces changed as they peered through the eyepiece, from skeptical curiosity to genuine admiration. "Young man," said one of the jurors, an older man with glasses, "this is amazing. You really know what you're talking about." Tamana saw the mood in the courtroom change. The jury no longer looked at Lamar as a robbery suspect. They now saw him as a gifted, enthusiastic young scholar. "Your Honor," she addressed the judge, "the defense would like to draw the court's attention to a key point. Lamar Whitmore doesn't just say he was watching the stars on the night of the robbery. He is indeed deeply passionate about astronomy, has rare knowledge and skills, and his telescope requires constant presence and control. That makes the prosecution's version of his involvement in the robbery not just unlikely, impossible." Judge Coltrane nodded. "I must admit, the demonstration was impressive." At that moment, there was a sudden movement in the courtroom. A young man from the back row stood up and moved toward the exit. Tamana immediately recognized him as Jason Baird, the officer's nephew. Lamar noticed him too. "That's him," Lamar said abruptly, pointing to the departing Jason. "The other night when I was setting up the telescope, I saw that man running from the direction of the store. I didn't pay much attention to it then, but I recognize him now." Officer Baird turned sharply pale. "That's absurd. My nephew was at home that night." "I beg your pardon, Your Honor," came a new voice. Detective Parker stood in the aisle. "I have some new information on this case." Judge Coltrane looked puzzled. "Detective Parker, this is rather unusual. You've testified before." "I know, Your Honor, but I feel it necessary to inform the court that we discovered new evidence this morning. Stolen money and the knife used in the robbery were found in an abandoned barn, not far from where Lamar Whitmore was arrested." A murmur went up in the hall. The detective continued. "Fingerprints were found on the knife. They belonged to Jason Baird." All eyes turned to the door, but it was too late. Jason was gone. Officer Baird sat dazed, with an expression of absolute shock on his face. I personally checked Jason Baird's alibi, Detective Parker continued. His mother admitted that she lied about his whereabouts that night at the request of her brother, Officer Baird. Judge Coltrane looked extremely alarmed. Mr. Dawson, what do you have to say about that? The prosecutor looked as if the ground had gone from under his feet. Your Honor, this is new information to me. I need time to sort it out. In light of the new evidence, the judge said firmly, I find it necessary to dismiss all charges against Lamar Whitmore immediately. The jury no longer needs to reach a verdict. The case is closed because of the defendant's obvious innocence. The hall exploded with cheers and applause. Chanel rushed to hug her son, tears of joy streaming down her face. Tamana shook hands with everyone around her, unable to contain her smile. One of the jurors, an older woman, approached Lamar. Young man, I want to apologize for doubting you. Your knowledge and passion for science, it has been a real revelation to me. Thank you, Lamar replied, embarrassed. I'm just glad it's over. Judge Coltrane beckoned Lamar over to him. Mr. Whitmore, on behalf of the court, I apologize for the ordeal you've been through. Your telescope will be returned to you immediately, safe and sound. Thank you, Your Honor, Lamar replied, gingerly touching his instrument. It means a lot to me. I can see that, the judge nodded. Also, I would like to organize a field trip for the school children from the local elementary school to your observatory. I think it would be good for them to see what a young person can accomplish if they are truly passionate about science. Lamar brightened. With pleasure, Your Honor. As they left the courtroom, Tamana lingered next to Detective Parker. Thank you, she said quietly. You did the right thing. Parker nodded. I was just doing my job, Miss Choudhury. Justice must be served, even if you have to go against the system to do it. Outside, reporters and citizens were waiting for them. The story of the astronomer boy, falsely accused of a crime but proven innocent through his passion for science, instantly captured everyone's attention. Among the crowd, Tamana spotted Mr. Ellison, Lamar's physics teacher, waving cheerfully. I told you he was special, he shouted. Chanel held her son's hand tightly, as if afraid he might be taken from her again. We did it, Lamar. Justice has been served. No, Mom, Lamar smiled. We didn't just get justice. We showed everyone that prejudice and stereotypes shouldn't define who we are. Tamana looked at this amazing young man and felt that today's victory was more than just an acquittal. It was a moment of truth when the system, which often worked against people like Lamar, was forced to admit its mistake and see the person instead of the stereotype. What are you going to do now? She asked Lamar. Tonight, watching the stars, of course, he replied simply, and in the long run, NASA should make room for me. Everyone laughed, but Tamana saw the determination in Lamar's eyes that told her this wasn't just a joke. This boy really could reach the stars. In the meantime, in the small town of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, one trial made many people rethink their preconceptions and see that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are true, and a passionate teenager with a telescope can teach the entire justice system a lesson in fairness.